Welcome back to another episode of Soch Samjho, IOBM's Media Literacy Podcast. Today's discussion is about disinformation in news, how to spot and possibly stop it, and how media visuals shape public perceptions, detecting manipulation and political actions in news, and the ethical responsibilities, of course, of media creators. So today we have a very wonderful guest with us, Giovana Fleck. Giovanna Fleck is a journalist, researcher, and advocate who harnesses the power of storytelling to drive social change. Giovanna, right now, she leads Global Voices' Civic Media Observatory and served as an editor for stories from Lusophone Africa. Currently, she works as a freelance reporter in Amsterdam and as a policy advisor for media and human rights at RNW Media. Welcome to the podcast, Giovanna.
Thank you so much, Umer. It's so great to be here. I'm really honored, and it's also great to talk to you. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you for coming and accepting our invitation for the to appear on, to share your insights on the topic. So, John, I'll just go straight to the topic. You must have overseen countless visual stories in your career as a journalist, right? So, how do you decide what kind of visuals, let's say, will resonate most with viewers, especially in conflict reporting or humanitarian crises?
I think this is a really good question because I think what a lot of people don't realize about the work of journalists or the work inside of media is that everything is a decision, and the decision making process really impacts the outcome of a story or of the impact of that story as well. And we do have a method for the decisions that we make. It's not just like pure feeling or gut feeling. There is a process behind it. I think it's also fair to say that I've worked as a photojournalist for a while I was reporting in my home country, in Brazil. I used to have a feminist photo collective that was trying to portray gender struggles in the south of Brazil. The collective is still kind of active, but now we all kind of went away from our hometown, so we're doing it more individually. And in parallel to that, I also specialize in data journalism, and I had a data visualization specialty instead of the journalism field where I was practicing. Um, and all of that really came with this idea that no matter what you choose to emphasize, you're always framing it from one specific perspective. And in framing something, you're leaving a lot that is on the outskirts out of the story. So those decisions, I think they're very, very important, and you need to have a conscious act of doing so. I think a lot of that goes through which kind of impact you want to reach, how much empathy can you generate, because visuals have a lot of power to generate empathy and proximity with the public, and also how accurately are you telling the story, or how much dignity are you putting on the the characters you're portraying or the people that you're portraying. But I think your question was a lot about this decision making and how does that come to be as well. I think you need to take these components into consideration, and to make a really good, compelling story, somewhat you need to connect to the public. You need to show, and sometimes you can show through images things that are not so evident through storytelling, through words. So if you can compose a picture or even a graphic with enough elements that tell a story per se, I think that's a good way to move forward.
Yeah. So, can a single photo or video clip shape public opinion more than, let's say, a thousand-word article? Have you seen such example in your work?
I think nowadays that's more difficult than ever before. The way we are compelled to interact with the information ecosystem around us is by over consuming images and videos and content that really is really there to overstimulate us as humans. If you think about images that really move us, those are images that impact us emotionally or have a like some sort of a profound connection with ourselves. that's harder and harder these days because it feels like marketing, but also different tools figured out a way of massively doing so. So I think they still can, but it's much more difficult. And when we talk about inside of um, information integrity circles, anti-disinformation conversations, it becomes even more critical to really find what those connectors are. And of course, they depend a lot on context. Of course, they depend a lot on current situations where that specific image or that specific content is going to circulate. I did find a few examples in my, maybe not in my own reporting, but in colleagues' reporting for sure. Um, but I think what makes them unique and what makes them timely as well is the circumstances where they're placed. So, for example, when it comes to climate disasters, images are really, really key in communicating the magnitude of that specific disaster and how much people are being affected. Because once you see something, you can put yourself in the place of those people. Once you see a house completely collapse, you can understand it from the perspective of, whoa, that could have been my house. So I think those are situations in which I've seen it play out more. But of course, there are many other examples to cite.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point because we are so flooded with information and we see images on TikTok and Instagram and so many platforms that powerful images, let's say, that powerful. And again, it's rightly said that some images do carry weight in them. For example, if there is a flood and we take a like an aerial footage from a drone or something and it shows
Yeah.
widespread devastation. So as you rightly pointed out, it's likely to resonate with people more. So Joanna, but what makes a visual, in your view, go viral? Is it the content, the context, or the platform?
That's a great question. I wish I had a one fits all answer for this question, which unfortunately is not true. It really depends. As you said, it depends on context. It depends on the platform as well. The way algorithmic bias is used oftentimes against really purposeful and integral content definitely doesn't help for images that maybe should go viral, that should become part of the mainstream, or should become more part of like the awareness consensus inside of population. They just don't get there because oftentimes algorithms push those images down. Um, but I think it's a lot related um, to a certain sense of public consensus, if that makes sense. So I think usually people tend to consume things that are already close to them. If an image can even highlight that further, I think that's pretty powerful and it tends to go even more viral. But that's for the good and for the bad as well. Disinformation and outrageous pieces of spurious fake news, as it's popularly known, um, they tend to go viral very fast. I don't usually use fake news that much because it feels like a negation of the mere idea of news, if it's journalism, it could not be fake. So that's why we tend to use words like disinformation when it's intended to propose harm, and misinformation when it's not intentionally harmful, but still shared within circles that make that piece of content harmful, especially to specific populations and sometimes marginalized communities. Um, but I think disinformation has a really high stake of going viral too fast. And the reasons for that are many. Like they tend to implicate emotions, and they tend to implicate this feeling that you need to spread it, you need to share it. More people should know this outrageousness, when grounded and factually based information are less sexy and less interesting sometimes. Um, and yeah, let go less viral. But for the examples that I've seen, like you were talking about floodings for before, for example. My hometown last year was hit by an unprecedented flood in Brazil. And one of the images that circulated the most, and it became so viral and so popular so fast, was this image of a horse on the top of a roof and being completely surrounded by water, and the horse stayed there for 4 days. Um, so that image was pretty impactful. I think people could really empathize of the horse, or maybe the naivety of the horse, the fact that this was a human made catastrophe and animals are suffering for it. There was this whole commotion to rescue the horse, and in the end, he was rescued. The horse is still out there, but I think that was one of the images that marked this catastrophe the most. And it's interesting. It still generates some type of empathy towards the public.
Yeah, I think that's a great example because it shows that there is still a room for powerful visual journalism. Like if people are passionate about a cause, if they're seeing some catastrophe unfolding around them, and then some powerful visuals, videos, footage or photo comes in, then I think that surely creates an impact. It also reminds me of one photo that I can't get out of my head of late. They just resumed aid in Gaza, and there was this photo. I think it was taken by Al Jazeera, where they were like in sort of a cage, and I think a starving population waiting to receive aid. So I think that was a very powerful image.
When you put that inside of the context that foreign journalists were not allowed in Gaza, most of the photos and the coverage that we have are from local journalists who are undergoing extreme pathways to provide us with information, to provide us with images, and at the same time, who are suffering the impacts of the war themselves, who are losing family, who are losing friends, who are losing their whole existence in a way. I think that even becomes more and more impactful, should become more impactful, should become more important as well. For us to know the value of those images. But unfortunately, I think there is some sort of I don't know, underscoring maybe of human suffering in those situations that makes those images makes some people much more aware and uh building empathy towards it. But it feels quite outraging that more people don't feel this way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, which perfect brings me to my next question. We often hear the phrase that optics matter in politics. So, how do political campaigns or use visual cues to manipulate or influence audiences of voters? Just as we were discussing that it became a political issue for some people, they don't care. For some people, it's the biggest issue out there. So, how do you view that?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. For context, for close to 5 years, I've been leading an initiative called the Civic Media Observatory, in which we try to understand how narratives are created and how they're shaped, and which sources of influence and power do they benefit from. Um, and a lot of that had to do with analyzing images and analyzing political content to understand how were narratives present inside of those images. What are the messages that they're conveying? Because oftentimes they do convey a lot of messages. Um, I remember, for example, years and years ago, when I was a student, I had the opportunity to visit Russia, and every single tourist shop had one of those like tourist mats with an image of Putin shirtless on the top of a bear or hunting or something like that. And at the time it was funny. At the time I was very young as well, so it felt like something banal, something, yeah, to not be considered. But as I started to do this work inside of the Civic Media Observatory, that very silly example actually became part of the norm, not only inside of Russia, but other very patriarchal countries. The value disposition of the strong man as a leader, and the value disposition of the hunter, the provider, the person who can provide security, and make that part of their politics as well. And then you see a correlation between that type of imagery and an escalation of authoritarian practices as well. Um, this is something that inside of our research methodology we call subtext or subtextual information. So it's information that it's not necessarily obvious, but for a specific population, for a specific type of audience, it will make a lot of sense and will communicate to them. Or even through using imagery and symbolism that is a bit less explicit, you would still forward this message that in the end, that's what they're trying to, what they're aiming for. I think it's no coincidence as well that in political campaigns, depending on um, what audience you want to reach or what type of electorate you want to reach, you would see a variance of the candidate. And that's not per se bad or undemocratic, but I think it's valid to pay attention to those because it does shows a tendency of the candidate to mold himself or herself or themselves to a different imagery that is more convenient to a specific type of audience. And depending on those, like you see the shift in discourse, you see how much they are willing to adapt as well, or how much they are not willing to adapt, how much they are only arguing for one front. And that's also interesting. And I think that's also a consequence of, I'm saying that from a democratic perspective, but of course, that also deals a lot instead of autocracies and ways that like different power sources position themselves. But I think it's especially interesting in democracies and democracies that nowadays are going through uh, a right wing rebranding or the way to think about this polarization as well.
Like everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
I think it sometimes it feels like as if every 100 years there's sort of a reset where there's you see a surge of right wing and then everything just goes south.
Yeah.
So that Putin example, I mean, I it's very interesting that you brought that up because that was if you ask me, I would say that that was sort of a propaganda like very open in
Umer, I'm so sorry. I cannot hear you. You broke up a little bit. I'm so sorry.
uh okay, am I audible now? Can you hear me?
I think so. Yeah. I think I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so I was just admiring your earlier point about Putin that you saw mugs and T-shirts and other sort of thing with his face on. So I think if you ask me, I think that was more like very in your face type of a propaganda, like so very open. Uh, Makes me think that could you walk us through a moment where you spotted a similar visual propaganda in news or social media, but that was like sort of subtle but effective.
You know, the example that comes to my mind, I'm not sure if I would frame it exactly as political propaganda, but it's more like straightforward, not like subtle fascism, I would say. But I think it's a relevant example to cite here. Um, as you know, Brazil was governed from 2018 to 2022 by Jair Bolsonaro, who was a president identified with the far right. And he was a president that also didn't shy away from externalizing racist, homophobic, misogynistic comments. And I clearly remember this one live stream.
My voice is broken. Just give me.
Omer, can you hear me? What? What happened?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah. Oh,
Really sorry, Giovanna. So you were saying something about Bolsonaro.
no worries. Should I start again?
Yeah, maybe you can.
Just to make sure. Um, yeah. So, um, yeah. The example that comes to my mind, it's not propaganda per se, but more like underlying fascism messages. But I think it's relevant to say in this conversation or to mention. So as you know, been talking about it for a really long time over the course of our friendship. Brazil was governed by Jair Bolsonaro for 4 years for one presidency term. And Bolsonaro was not only a president that aligned himself with the far right, he was openly racist, homophobic, misogynistic. Um, and at a certain extent, there was a speculation about his ties or relationship with white supremacist groups. And Bolsonaro used to host a live stream every Thursday. It was one of his efforts to connect with the people a little bit more through a more democratic platform. So he chose Facebook to do that. And those live streams were open. Um, Thousands of people would connect weekly, and he would host it, oftentimes with allies on one table. And he would give presidential comments on current issues. He would communicate his recent actions. It would be a platform for him to do state level communication to civil society. And then there was this one live stream, a very unusual one, where he was drinking from a glass of milk, and he was drinking milk quite often. Um, but this is a very, very odd thing for Brazilians. We don't really drink milk. Like maybe we pour it in our coffee and that's it. But then and there's some questionable people who drink like a lot of milk with a little bit of coffee, but not pure milk per se. That's a very United States thing, in my opinion. But Bolsonaro was doing that, and he was doing that in that specific live stream. And there was no acknowledgement of the glass of milk. He was just there, he was drinking it. Um, and it turns out it was a reference to white supremacist groups, in which drinking milk is a form of acknowledging to each other that where you belong to, so that you belong to one of those groups. And the milk being white supremacists here and there, like that's what it is. Bolsonaro later came on with a statement saying that there was nothing about white supremacy. It was um, an act to recognize uh, the latticing industry in Brazil, but the damage was already made. And then all those groups, they felt entitled to be part of the conversation as well. So, and social media, you also had people really acknowledging him um, for quotation marks defending the rights of white people inside of Brazil. Um, and I think it's a strong example as well of how those things can really impact civic discourse, and not only that, how they can actually pose harm to people. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt now. Let's say that that was not the intention, that he was really praising the milk industry inside of Brazil. The lack of oversight of how that could be interpreted, the subtextual imagery of inside of that, that's already pretty harmful. Um, Let alone the fact that I find it really hard to believe that that was actually the case, that it was not intentional. Um, so yeah, I think when you talk about propaganda, you are also talking about imagery, discourse, storytelling that aims at a specific target, that aims at a specific reasoning. And I think people need to be very careful and aware of those are really aware and careful of strings of power that can benefit from that. Because sometimes even pressing share can be a huge uh, impactful tool to amplify those sets of discourse.
Yeah, very right. And it's a very powerful example. I think if I now think about it, that using a glass of milk to convey a message that we're sort of brother in arms with the other far right groups, white supremacist groups. But how can how can the average viewer distinguish between such propaganda, or let's say visual storytelling and visual manipulation, sort of a political campaign? Also,
You You broke a little bit, but I think I got your question. How the average consumer can identify what's propaganda from what is not. Is that it?
Yeah,
Okay, I think that's it. Sorry, you were still breaking a little bit, but I think that's it. Um, yeah, I think that's a really, really hard ask as well from people. Because honestly, like being very honest, we're all tired. We are so tired. And then you get home and like you go to your preferred platform and then you are bombarded with information and you still need to distinguish between what is accurate, what is not, what is trustworthy, what is not. And you're set up to failure because if you're doing it on digital media and you're doing it on a platform like Facebook, for example, that pushes down the content of journalists and pushes up content that is highly engaging and emotional and oftentimes false, then it becomes really hard because then you actually need to proactively look for it. But my answer is unfortunately, there's no easy way around it. I think the only antidote to it is more and more information. And like the more people are wary of different perspectives, the more resilient they are to types of disinformation that might come their way, propaganda, foreign influence as well, the ways that their attention might be captured and targeted. Um, the more you know about relevant, trustworthy sources, the more you can connect with them. But I think there's also a role that we play as journalists at the same time. And that's why I'm so happy that this podcast is happening in terms of communicating to audiences how those decisions are made and how we see these issues as well and how we go about those issues. Because for me, it's also hard. I am a journalist living abroad outside of my country, and I'm also inside of a culture that is not my own. So sometimes I also like the context and the expertise to fully differentiate from what is trustworthy from what is not. It takes an effort, it takes time, it takes knowledge, and you do need to put those into practice. And I would say, like, I've been seeing more and more community journalism being initiatives of community journalism being built to fully engage with people, to bring them in, because there is a component of agency as well inside of an information ecosystem. If you're only consuming and navigating it, you might not be as aware or have the same feeling towards specific types of news as someone who's actually producing it. I think there's a lot of knowledge also to share when you try to tell a story from your perspective, because then you are confronted with those decisions, with this decision making process. And I think that's a really powerful tool. But again, it costs time, it costs resources, sometimes money as well to invest inside of that. It's not an easy ask. And we see governments that are less and less interested in fostering that inside of civil society. And quite on the contrary, or the opposite, repressing journalism or repressing voices that are pluralistic, that are trying to bring new perspectives. So no easy answer. I wish there was one, but I think it's a combination also of individual effort and um, circumstances around you that are working in your favor.
yeah, I think no easy answers, as you said. We are also talking about, we have so far talked about mostly how audiences, can identify manipulation or fake news or mis or disinformation. But I would like to, as we head towards conclusion, I would like to talk more about ethics and responsibility in visual journalism. So where should the line be drawn between showing the brutal truth and respecting human dignity when it comes to reporting, primarily visual reporting? I mean,
Um, yeah, I think it's always a case
blur. You
what to blur. Yeah, yeah, what to conceal sometimes. Um, a lot of impactful journalism and impactful visual storytelling has to do with showcasing humans, especially under difficult circumstances. Um, and a lot of those images are taken without people's consent. without asking. Sometimes the moment doesn't allow for it, but sometimes even if the moment doesn't allow for it, you need to do a risk assessment if you're exposing this person to a circumstance where they might suffer backlash after you publish this picture. Um, Instead of a newsroom, uh, you tend to see colleagues, people saying, once you put a story out, you have no control anymore. It's out of your hands. That's not actually the case, and especially when it comes to legal and ethics settings. You are responsible for the information that you put out. You are responsible for those images as well, and the aftermath of that too. Um, so I think there has to be some sort of oversight, especially in terms of consent and in terms of potential harm that it might provoke if you are in a conflict situation, if you are in a situation where people could be targeted, or you are photographing someone doing something illegal, or that even under restrictive circumstances is considered illegal or out of the rules. You need to make the assessment of how revealing this person or exposing this person's identity could potentially harm them. Um, and at the same time, there's this idea of public interest inside of journalism. So there are certain things that even if they are seen as private or personal, they serve the public interest. So they also should be revealed. That's usually the case for public figures, people that are part of the political conversation, or people that are being denounced for something, more like denouncing journalism. But that's also a very thin line between what is public, and it's been a discussion since forever, what is public interest and what is not when it comes to revealing very sensitive data. And I think another component to that is also assessing it in an age where facial recognition is a reality. And it's a reality, especially in countries that apply digital authoritarianism. So sometimes when you release the facial characteristics of a person under settings of dispute or settings of showcasing a difficult situation, what could be the implications of this person to be identified in that circumstance to them? And I'm even talking about like people on the background, not even like the main person inside of the picture. What could be the implications of that? So I think it's a really, really tricky time, and there has to be a lot of oversight. But even in those circumstances, you have tools and alternatives. Like you said, you can blur someone in the picture. That's usually used for children and people who cannot give full consent under a certain situation. And you can still showcase something. There are light tricks that you can do as well. A lot of journalists and photographers choose to showcase a shadow instead of the full body of the person or the face. There are ways you can conceal the person's face. There was this very interesting work that I've seen recently at a World Press Photo exhibition, where this one photographer was doing an essay on illegal immigrants, and he concealed their face with plants or objects that they had at hand, to still show the main characteristics of the people and where they were placed as well, the scenarios where they were placed. I think there are creative ways to circumvent them. People have done it in the past.
Lost your audio again. Just 1 second.
Oh,
Hi, what's going on?
can you hear me?
No.
Okay. Yeah, no, but I think that was the main idea, is to just like make sure that you bear witness to a situation, but at the same time, you respect human dignity, and you respect the people that you are trying to portray, because those people should also have a saying into their image or how that's shown to the world or to different audiences.
Yeah. So, but very, very valid points, and very insightful. But we're living in, as you said, in the very difficult age. It's the age of social media where everybody is a content creator. So, what ethical responsibilities do viral storytellers carry? Especially when we just discussed that visuals can mislead or trigger.
Yeah. Also, really good question. And what? Sorry?
I'm saying no stopping them because everybody is a content creator. They can do how they please.
Everyone is, right? And everyone holds the truth as well and power to it. Everyone. Um, yeah, I think, I mean, wearing my human rights and freedom of speech advocate hat, the way I would go about this question is that everyone is given this power, but we don't necessarily know how to use it consciously. So I would love to see more digital and media literacy classes in school from an early age. I would love to see more accessible tools and guides to civil society tailored to specific communities. But that's just not the reality. And as I said before, governments don't see it as a priority at all. So we are left with a very chaotic media ecosystem, especially online. Um, but from an ethical standpoint, everyone bears a certain responsibility to treat the information they are sharing with care and with the same yeah, I think the same sort of responsibility, maybe not as journalists, but as consumers and creators of information. There is this component of agency, and I think that's also what a lot of jurisdictions are trying to understand as well. How much is the platform's role in terms of um, uh, regulating, moderating certain types of content? How much that's um, individual ownership? How much of that is like a higher level type of I'm forgetting the word now. I'm so sorry. But yeah, this distinction between individual ownership, platform content control, and moderation as well, uh, and how much people can actually be responsible for it. Because if it is a journalist, then there's a clear path towards responsibility. Our ethics guide is regulated within, it has been sanctioned internationally as well. There are many organizations that are dedicated to put it into place. Many journalists, we go through a training that teaches us what those ethics guides are. But I'm also a person that thinks that journalism shouldn't go through a specific training. I think ethics should be part of everyone's um, agenda or everyone's knowledge base. And then from there, we can have also more perspectives and more diversity. Yeah, but at the same time, it's a tricky thing, and it's a tricky thing to implement, and it's a tricky thing as well to um, in terms of accountability to seek accountability for. Yeah, so no conclusive answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying it actually makes sense because as journalists, if let's say a journalist, an influential journalist, that has a lot of following and so many people read their work, if they're going to go about doing something that is unethical, so other journalists are going to call them out, and publications are going to call them out. So they sort of also pressure from the press, and
Hmm.
so it also acts as a check and balance because nobody would want to be known as a journalist who spreads propaganda or who uh, through sensational kind of reporting or something like that. But I don't think
Hmm.
that's the case with content creators who are not journalists because they have nobody. They have a lot of put such that guys or tell issue a clarification or something. So that's something that's definitely lacking, and I think some ethical responsibility would surely go a long way in helping everybody. So, Giovanna, could
Yeah,
you?
sorry. That's a good point. That was a really good point. Sorry. Yeah, even though we have ethical standpoints, since it's journalism and other forms of misrepresenting those ethics, they still exist. And it's not safeguarded that you're gonna have like good forums and good sources of reporting all the times. Of course, I think it also goes back to the previous question that you had asked in terms of like how can we uh, make sure that civil society can avoid disinformation, can be more critical over the content that they're consuming as well, right? Yeah, in a way, I think everything is interconnected.
Yeah. So I would just like to ask you one last question. I mean, how would you like to wrap up your thoughts?
Uh, I think I spoke a lot about visual journalism and storytelling from thinking about as well about a video or maybe photography, maybe video perspective. But I think there's a lot in data journalism as well that complements this discussion. There were a few reportings that really marked me during the time of COVID. There's one that I really recommend everyone who's listening, maybe watching, to check it out. It's called At the Epicenter. It's an initiative led by Brazilian researchers and visual designers, and it would showcase within your region at the time of the pandemic, the region where you lived, uh, how many people had died around you, considering the statistics of your country. Um, it's a really, really powerful tool, and one of the ones that stuck with me for probably will stick with me for my whole career in terms of showcasing how your surroundings and how you can really humanize data, how you can really humanize an image from a database standpoint. And I think like this is the end point that I want to reach as well in terms of we really need to humanize our experiences, and journalism is all about that. Storytelling is all about that. And the more we can show this human side of what we are writing about, even if it's like a very mundane thing, I think the more connections we can create, and the more agency as well we can foster inside of civil society and people who consume journalism and might be interested also in making the information ecosystem, either offline or online, a little bit healthier.
That was very nicely concluded, and I was just saying that thank you for your time and for these wonderful insights.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the really thoughtful questions.